They tell you the half the truth, you know, like if you got a natural immunity, you still got to get a shot, which is baloney. And if you get a shot, then you can't pass the disease on to somebody else. That's not true, folks.
That's right.
They proved that in Israel. Most of the people that's catching it from somebody, they catch it from somebody that's already had the shot. So, see, there's so much false information. But that's one thing, and of many things. And this great bunch of, I don't know what you call them, that's supposed to be running our country. Devils. Absolutely. And I know this might be going over the internet or whatever.
That's okay. We need to be bold.
No, I'm just going to tell you like that. I believe the man has sold out to the communist Chinese people. I believe he has. I cannot name one thing that this man has done to make this country better from the time he took office. And I'm sorry if that offends anybody. But I watch the news, and I can tell what they're telling us, not telling us, and what they are telling us, and separate the two. If you get your sources from the right people, you know what's going on. But anyway,
and two, Brother Dean, they're talking about your bank accounts.
yeah,
Now that,
we don't know what's down the line.
If you deposit or withdraw $600 if they pass this bill, the IRS will.
Yeah.
Used to be 10,000, down to 600.
you know, that,
Well, we're in a time where the government is trying to control the people right down to the very job and the money they spend and everything about their life.
did y'all see that young military man today? He already had corona. That's going to make him take another shot. They
Yeah.
forced him to, he did, and then now he's paralyzed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just.
We have no righteous judges in our land. Seems like.
Yeah, it looks like when you cross over that border over there into Washington, D.C., you have to check your backbone in at the door. You know, you want to just scream at the Republicans and say, you stand up, you know. And at the stupid Democrats, you want to say, listen, you're fixing this nation for your grandchildren too. You know, don't you think that they're going to grow up under communism if you don't change? But it don't soak in.
And that young military man that just stepped out against what's going, they've got him in prison.
Yeah,
They've got him in solitary confinement
that's,
because he just expressed what he felt.
well, there's enough bad news to go around for sure. Seems like even more nowadays. I've never seen anything like it. I never thought it would come to this. I never did. I thought it'd be a long time. But in 6 months, I've seen things I never thought would take place in this country. Anyway, we're told in Luke 12, and it just, I'll just read it. There's no use turning to these places because it's just a little short passage. Something that I want to read so you remember it. Luke chapter 12, verse 22. I want you to remember this. He says, he said to his disciples, therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, neither for the body what ye shall put on. When he said take no thought, what he's saying is don't worry about it. I remember years ago I don't have to tell that story. Let's just move on. Our problem is a lot of times we think that God only moves because of our personal conduct. That if we just get good enough and we pray enough, we study enough and go to church enough and we give enough and all these things that we do, that then God is obligated some way to us to perform a miracle. And we're caught up in that. We don't think we are, but we are. I myself, for years, something bad would happen, and I would blame myself. You don't pray enough. You don't study enough. You had a bad thought the other day. You was mad at somebody. And it goes on and on and on. Let me tell you, that mostly is from the devil. It's mostly from the devil. Some of the things that come into your life, and you will know the difference, is God convicting you of things. I understand that. But to constantly blame everything on yourself and think that your conduct has to be perfect before God will have anything to do with you, that's not in this Bible. If he was looking for people that lived a perfect life, David would never be king of Israel. Paul would never be able to preach. All down through history, the men that's fought God the most sometimes are the ones that he uses. If we depend on our personal conduct, I didn't go to church today. Well, you should go to church. But you're not going to be beat over the head by the Lord if you don't. He's not dependent on your conduct. If you're not in church, you need to be, but the reason to be here is to gather yourselves together with those of like passion, those with like faith, because it gives you strength. And even in these days, even more so. There's stories in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell of Jesus feeding thousands of people with little fishes and loaves. You know, it's once he feeds 5,000, another 4,000, like with 7 loaves or something. And anyway, you see that people follow him out into the wilderness. And he knows, he knew ahead of time. He knows all of this and had it all worked out. He's told his disciples, he said, give them something to eat. He said, I have compassion on them because they've followed me out here in this desert for 3 days. And then he told his disciples, you know the story. We've heard it all of our life. The little boy brought his lunch. And he handed it to his disciples. He blessed it and handed it to them and said, now, you go feed the people. Now, what if our conduct, had anything to do with this? He said, have them sit down now in little groups of 50 and 100, whatever, little small groups. Sent his disciples out, and they held the food there and said, how many hours did you pray today? Did you tithe? How many times did you go to church? Did you say any bad words? Are you mad at your husband or wife? What if he put them through the ringer, testing their conduct just to see if they was good enough to receive this blessing? But there's no question in here at all. Jesus never asked one question, never said anything except, I have compassion on them, he said. And he fed them all. And you know good and well that there was people in that crowd. If you got 4,000 and 5,000 people, not everybody's sitting on the front row. There's people in there, they didn't even know who he was, probably. Just moved with the crowd. Didn't know nothing, didn't believe nothing, just hear a man they liked to hear talk and wandered off with the crowd. But none of that made any difference when it come time for God to move. And that's something we're going to have to get a hold of in this country. We think, well, the church done this and the church didn't do that. If the church had done this and the church, let me tell you something. I am sick up to here with everybody telling that the church caused all of this. The best people in the world are in the church. But you hear it all the time. I tell you what, if we just so-and-so prays an hour a day. If they'd have prayed 3 hours, we wouldn't be in this trouble. Or if this preacher had preached this, we wouldn't be in this trouble. Let me tell you something. When it comes time for God to move, He don't need our permission. And regardless of how the church is, He can fix His church. He can correct His church. He can guide His church any way He wants them to go. But He don't want His people blamed for everything that comes down the line. And the world would love to do that, wouldn't they? Don't want the preachers to preach because they might hurt somebody's feelings. If they'd been here last week, they'd have probably thrown tomatoes at me because I had to say some things. But then we see that God moves in a lot of different ways. And we can't tell Him, see. We can't dictate to Him when to move, how to move, when to bless, when to get. We can't do that. He tells us over and over, He moves by His own counsel. Nobody stands up and says, God, you better do this. You owe me this. And all of that. You know, it's not like that. But He does move different ways. All right, He moves out of compassion. He blesses as a reward for your works. He blesses and moves because of a promise in His Word. Like thousands of them. He shall supply all your needs according to His riches and glory. That's a promise. It's not to a certain person. It's to everybody that believe it. He said He'll supply your needs. There's a promise. Or because of our giving. Remember, He said, if you give, I'll cause men to give unto you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. If you give. So there is blessings, and God will move because of your giving. He also will move in response to your faith. But this is all His decision. And He knows exactly when to move and what to do at the appointed time. But none of this happens because of men's perfect conduct. Now, I know there's rewards and blessings that come to people that make an honest effort to live right before God, but every Christian should. Every Christian should make an effort to live right before God because of this one thing. We bear His name. Amen. I remember a story of Alexander the Great. He went to visit this hospital, and there was this young man there. And the doctor said he'd lead them around to meet each one that had been wounded. And he said, what's wrong with this man? The doctor said, well, he's got a nerve problem. He deserted in battle. Alexander the Great walked up to him and said, what's your name, son? He said, the same as yours, Alexander. He grabbed him. He said, let me tell you something. You change your ways or you change your name. So the church, if you're going to bear His name, there's things, the responsibilities that we have. And Paul said, if you're going to name His name, claim His name, you depart from iniquity. Because you are an ambassador. You represent Him. You don't go hang around a bar on Saturday night and come in here and sing praises to God. You don't do that. God's not going to knock you dead. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that that is not the way you represent Christ at all. I spent years in nightclubs. Drinks lying down the piano and all the cuss words and the filth that you hear in there. And then at the end of the night, one of the singers would get up and sing, How Great Thou Art. You know. Then he's done that just about every night. Because Elvis sang it, you know. And I thought, boy, what an opposing thing we have going on here. If you think God is so great, what are we doing in this trash dump? What are we doing entertaining drunk people that don't even know one song from another when you get through playing them? That don't even care anyway, and half the people's not with their right husband or wife. Why are we doing it in this atmosphere? Well, you're going to be there until God changes you. And that's what happened to me. I was about 29 years old. But anyway, Alexander the Great says, you change your ways or you change your name. If you're going to represent me, you change how you live your life. And I think that'd be a real good advice for the church. It would be good advice. Now, to prove some things. John chapter 9. I'm going to read a little bit here. And show you some things that help you to remember what I'm saying. All right, chapter 9 and begins at about verse 21, somewhere along in there. There was a blind man that Jesus healed. And after he was healed, of course, the religious leaders, they come against him because, they didn't fit into their idea of what spirituality was or something. But he healed this blind man, and this blind man had been blind his whole life. And the religious leaders came to his mom and dad and asked them. And they said, by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He's of age, ask him. He'll speak for himself. The point is, these people didn't have any idea who Jesus was, yet he performed a great miracle. He performed a great miracle on their son. Go on and you see, I got it marked here, 36. The young man came to Jesus, or Jesus met him. And verse 36, and he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? He was still asking, who is this man that healed me? Now the point is this. God can move without you even knowing who he is. Just strictly out of mercy and love for a person, he can move. You may not even know who caused that great thing to happen in your life. But God's blessings can be on your life and you not even have a relationship with him. Because he can see down the line and see the end from the beginning. But this man had no idea who Jesus was. And he said, let me know who he is so I can believe in him. After that, he knew. That's one example. He knows everything about us. What we used to be, what we are now, and what we're going to be. And he makes his decisions based on what he sees in our life. And he knows, he don't cause the future, but he knows the future of every human being. You cannot take man's will out of it. But you can be assured that he knows exactly what's going to happen. He knew back in them bars when I was banging on the drums or piano or something, that someday I'd be standing up here. He knew all of that. Had nothing to do with me being good. Had nothing to do with me even being qualified. I don't have the education some of you have at all. And I ask myself every time I try to get a lesson together, Lord, why me? I don't know. But the only thing I know is that I come here and Raymond and Gladys asked me to teach. I just did. That'll be 2 years this month. And I have learned as much as I've taught because I have to search and dig, see. I have to dig these things out because I don't want to stand up here and tell you something that's not in this book. But we see that these people had one thing in common that followed him out into the desert. They didn't, there's no proof or no evidence that they were perfect people or even religious people or even part of the Pharisees or Sadducees or nothing, just people. All kinds, men, women, children. But the blessing of God come upon them because he had compassion on them. That's the only reason. That's the only reason. And so that's one of the ways that I listed here that God moves. I want to mention one more thing here. And Acts 3:4. I want to bring this out for sure. Acts 3. And well, it starts in verse 4. And he says, there was a man there in 3, says a certain man lame from his mother's womb, been crippled all his life. And he laid at this gate, called the Gate Beautiful, they call it, right before you go into the temple. And it said, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked alms of them. Now, and we see a lot of that today. But this man was crippled and had, really, he had a right to be there if anybody did. He had a right to be there. He had a right to sit in front of that temple and expect God to help him. But what happened was, Peter and John prayed for him, and it said Peter took his hand, lifted him up, and the man was healed. You know the story. But then you go to verse 12, and look what it said. The people started to get their eyes on these disciples, begin to think that they were something special. And so they had to address that. And what they said here in 12 said, when Peter saw that they was kind of lifting them up, he answered the people, ye men of Israel, why marvel ye at this? Or why look ye so earnestly on us, as though by our own power, or here it is, or holiness, we had made this man to walk? He's saying right there, he's saying, it's not because we live right. It's not because of our holiness. It's nothing good in us. And he goes on to say, it's because of the power in the name of Jesus this man walks. And nothing else. A lot of times down through the years, we've had people with healing ministries. And that's good. You pray for the sick and they're healed. That still happens. I've seen it hundreds of times. But every now and then, they get the idea that they've got something to do with it. They have the idea that, boy, when I laid my hands on him, something happened. Well, God could make something happen without you touching them. We have to understand that. Just like Peter and John said, just because of our holiness, you think it's happening because we live right? I'm trying to make a point here. I hope I'm getting around. I'm going around by Murfreesboro, I know, to get there, but I'm trying to make a point is that we have got this thing built into us to think that we're going to earn points with God, and that he has got to bless us and got to use us and got to perform a miracle at our wish and command. Because we can go into a big auditorium and get $50,000 offering, we think God's favor is on us. You better be careful. Heard a man say one time, he said, the higher God lifts you up, the lower you better bow. Because pride goes before destruction. But anyway, This man was not healed by the character of these men or by their holiness, but he plainly tells it, but by the power in the name of Jesus. Now, not everybody can use that name. You know, the sons of Sceva tried it. Tried to cast the devil out, and the man jumped on them, beat him up, you know. And they said, you know, we know Jesus and we know Paul. Who are you? You ain't nothing. You just saying the name is not where the power is. Having the nature and the character, that's where the power is. And realizing that's the only place the power is. If you go into a hospital, lay hands on people and empty the whole place out, you better head for the first closet and get on your knees and stay there for a while. Because a man can lift himself up in a minute. Okay. I made 4 pages of notes. And usually end up throwing half of them away. Now the people in these 5,000 at one time and 4,000 at another that received this great miracle, they all ate and were filled. And there was nothing demanded of them, no test of righteousness for them to go through. The only thing they had going for them was this one statement. Jesus said himself, he said, I have compassion on the multitude. I have compassion on the multitude. He didn't make any demands on the multitude and say, I'm going to heal only those that believe and those that pay tithes and those that are in the temple every week. These are the only ones that I'm going to heal. Compassion bypasses all of that. The compassion of Christ will touch a sinner. Many times I've had thoughts when I was drinking and running around and acting like an idiot. But this one time sticks out in my mind. I was at this party. These people, I know I've told you this before. These people's parents was out of town. So we all got a bunch of booze, went over to going to have a party while they was out of town, and we was all just bad to drink anything, playing loud music and drinking and partying, and I was still sober enough to walk, but that's about all. And you won't believe this, but God began to deal with me. In that drunken state, God began to deal with me. I wasn't fit to talk to, but he began to deal with me. Now you tell me that ain't the compassion of Christ. Look down at somebody that's so drunk they can't even walk and begin to deal with them. So I went out behind that house and laid down in the grass. Looked up at the stars and said, oh God, don't let me die like this. I knew I was on the wrong track. And there's another one here that prayed that same prayer. Is that right? And God answered both of them, didn't he? Wasn't long after that I began to feel that convicting power of God on me. At the end I didn't know what it was. I would turn the radio on, and the sad part about it was I was so ignorant that I believed every preacher to come on there. Believed everything he said. And I would turn, when he was off, I'd turn and find me another one. I'd done that every day in my old car. I'd hunt for preachers on the radio. I remember one time his revival come to town, and I thought, I've got to go down there. So I went down there, and the Spirit of God was drawing me and pulling on me. And I pulled up to the tent and sat there in the car for a long time. Finally got enough nerve to go in. I sit down close to the back, like most of us do. Somehow down deep inside, we still feel that there's something holy about this altar, and there is. It's a place where men die and God lives. right here at this altar.
Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah.
But I went out and went inside the tent. And left before it was over. The devil pulling on me and the Spirit of God pulling on me. Finally, one day I turned the radio on. There's a man from Millersville preaching. So I said, I've got to go up there and hear this man. I went up there. But before then, in a recording studio in East Tennessee, I worked for this man up there that produced gospel music. Didn't believe a word of it, but he produced it. Had gospel groups come in there all the time, and he never went near a church. Just never got to him. Never got to me. Played hundreds of gospel sessions. Never got to me. But the Spirit of God was then on me and pulling on me. And one night late, after the studios all closed down, the producer called me and he said, you got a key to the studio? Yes, sir. He said, go over there and set mics up. We got a quartet coming in. We need 4 mics of this. We got the drums. We need this. Told me everything we needed. I said, okay, I run over there. And I went over there in the middle of the night. The Spirit of God's still pulling on me. I didn't know what it was. I just knew something was wrong. I had to do something. I had to deal with this. And there was a little booth there that was built, a drum, what they called a drum cage. It was supposed to be soundproof for the drums so they wouldn't leak into the other microphones. Dead silent in there in a recording studio. That's what it's supposed to be. By myself, I knelt down there in that drum booth and prayed as simple as I knew how. God, I'm sorry for what I've done. I don't know what I need to do, but if you forgive me, I'll try. Just something, don't even remember the words. And I thought, well, he didn't hear that, because when I stood up, felt the same. I thought I'll just end up getting me a big old black Bible and going down the street preaching. You know, I had all these crazy ideas that would happen. Fireworks maybe would hit me, or lightning bolts or something. Nothing happened, but I'll tell you what did happen. I went back to the nightclub where I was working at the time. And I looked out over that crowd, and for the first time I saw the place I was in. I heard the foul language and the glasses beating together, and saw people in there I knew that wasn't their wife they was with. Playing some rock and roll music, some country, whatever was requested. And I realized right then I did not belong in that place. Something had happened that I wasn't even aware of. Something changed my desires from the inside out. And from that day forward, I'm sorry to get into this long speech here, but I felt to get like getting into this. But little by little, I felt that change come to my life, and then back to the preacher in Millersville. I went up there and heard him preach for a while. I went to the altar. I began to work with him and travel with him for a while. One more story and then I'll hush. Somebody made the statement, you need to be baptized. Well, I knew what that was, you know. I didn't know why, but I had heard it preached and I've read about it, that a person needs to be baptized. Years later, before I really understood what it was all about, that you're buried with Christ and resurrected with him. It's symbolic of the resurrection, of death and resurrection of Christ in your own life. But I didn't go up there to be baptized. I left and got in my own mind. That was the thing about being a songwriter. You get in your mind too much, maybe. But in my own mind, I'm thinking, I don't see the purpose in this. But I did do one thing. When I was praying, I said, God, if I'm supposed to be baptized, if that's something I need to do, I'm going to drive out to the boat dock and you send a preacher out there to meet me. I know what you're thinking. That is the dumbest thing. Well, see, I thought I had him. I thought, well, I fooled him this time. You know, I lay this out there and he ain't going to have nobody out there waiting on me. So I got in my little truck and drove out to the boat dock where they put the boats down in the water. And there's a little bank there. There stood the preacher. Had his Bible out, and he had about a dozen or more people up on that bank preaching to him, and one by one took him down that water and baptized him. And I sat there. A cold chill run all over me. I thought, my God, I challenged him, and he cared enough about me to answer it. He talked to me. An old barroom, nightclub playing drunk, he talked to me. And that experience kept me for years and years and years. First time that church was open, I was up there being baptized. I'll never forget that. What a impression it made on me. The God of this universe would take time to answer somebody in their bedroom that asked them a foolish question. But in his eyes, there ain't nothing foolish. If you need it, he understands. He hears you. He hears you when you pray. I just said that so you would know. He hears you when you pray. Don't let your conduct, your personal conduct, the way you live, interfere with you asking God for what you need. He don't look at that. You're his child. If you need correcting, he sure can do it. He said he chastises all those that belong to him. He will fix you up good if you rebel against him. I've had him whip me many times. Had to. And thank God for it. But don't you worry about your conduct. He can straighten your conduct out. He will press on you. The Spirit of God will press on you and pull you until you make a change in your life, till you make a decision. He won't leave you alone because you belong to him. Anyway, I'm way off track. Some people in the crowd knew who he was, some didn't. Some listened to him, some didn't. Some lived good lives, some didn't. But the only thing that released that miracle into their life and let them have a part in it really kept some of them alive from starving to death in that desert. Jesus had compassion. And it's the same compassion he had on me when I asked this dumb question about being baptized. The same compassion he had on me when I laid back there drunk and asked him not to let me die. The same compassion is right here today. If you got something that you need to get off your shoulders, if something's bothering you, this is a place where men die and God lives. Well, in these last days when things get rough, and that's the bad news I was talking about. Could be a rough winter. Maybe times when you have to eat things you don't like. Maybe late on some bills. Your job may not hold out. But I have some advice that's as solid from one end of this book to the other. There's three things I believe that in these last days that the church needs. First of all, there's a lot of voices out there. A lot of different voices, and shame of it is that some of them claim to know Christ and claim to speak for him. But if you'll pay attention, he says, my sheep know my voice. So that's one of the things we need to do. We need to follow him, and we need to listen to him, and we need to go where he says go, and go only where he is. And if he's not there, take him with you. But there's things that we need to do. Number 2, stay in his presence. Go to church. Keep company with those in like faith. Come to church. Talk to people that believe like you talk, that like you believe. It will strengthen you. Listen to preachers like Sister Gladys. Listen to every word they got to say. Read your Bible. Stay in his presence. But the last one is do what he says. Follow him, stay in his presence, and do what he says. Whether it's in this word or a personal instruction he has for you. I've missed that a lot. But there's always grace and always mercy. If you mess up, he's there. He says, faithful and just to forgive us. We have an advocate. You know what an advocate is? Kind of like a lawyer. An advocate with the Father. Now, if we didn't need a lawyer, it'd be best if we wasn't guilty. But the problem is we're guilty. So we've got to have a good lawyer. Not only is our lawyer, but he's already done our time. I think I could go on further, but I'm going to go ahead and hush. I hope you remember these things, and I hope I remember these things. In the middle of the winter, you know, when it's cold and you might be behind in your bills, there's promises and things we can fall back on. And the promises of God are not based on your character. Remember that. If you get into that trap, you won't even pray. You got to get rid of that. Because if you think you're going to live this life and not make any mistakes, you'll never ask God for anything. Never believe him for anything, because you'll never feel like you're worthy. And the devil is there to try to get you not to feel worthy. And the truth is, we're not. We're not. But we only pray one thing, that Jesus once again will have compassion on the multitude. Thank God I'm part of that multitude. Bless your heart.